Ja, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, herzlich willkommen zur Rede an Europa. Herzlich willkommen zur Veranstaltung des NEOS Labs, des offenen Labors für neue Politik. Wir sind der Think Tank, die Bildungsakademie der NEOS. Und bevor wir heute in einen spannenden Abend starten, darf ich mich kurz vorstellen. Mein Name ist Birgit Allerstorfer, ich bin die Direktorin des Labs und ich verspreche Ihnen, es wird höchst interessant. Zur Begrüßung darf ich noch ausdrücklich und herzlich willkommen heißen und dich begrüßen, liebe Präsidentin des Labs, Abgeordnete zum Europäischen Parlament, Angelika Mlinar. Ebenso herzlich darf ich willkommen heißen dich, lieber Parteivorsitzende, Clubobfrau Stellvertreter, Abgeordneter zum Nationalrat, lieber Niki Scherak. Und ganz besonders freut mich heute auch eine große Anzahl an Mitgliedern unseres Lab-Vorstandes hier bei uns zu haben, des NEOS-Parteivorstandes, zahlreiche Abgeordneten, Wegbegleiter, Vertreter der Medien, auch sehr viele Kolleginnen aus Club, aus der Partei und natürlich interessierte Bürgerinnen und Bürger, die auch neu bei uns sind. Das ist ganz besonders schön. Herzlich willkommen. Und last but not least natürlich unseren Hauptredner des heutigen Abends. Er sitzt noch sehr gemütlich auf der Seite, das soll es auch sein. Es ist eine Lounge hier. Den renommierten Redner, den wir nachher erfahren werden, Ivan Krastev. Schön, dass du bei uns bist. Ja, als Think Tank setzen wir uns mit den relevanten, mit den brennenden Fragen der aktuellen Zeit auseinander. Auf der einen Seite in grundlegenden Analysen, in kritischen Diskursen und auch durch die Entwicklung von Szenarien. Und ich denke, all diese Dinge kristallisieren sich heute in dieser Rede an Europa. Und bevor wir in medias res gehen, darf ich dich, liebe Angelika, bitten zur Eröffnung für dein Keynote-Statement. Bitte schön.
Danke, liebe Birgit, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren. Schön, dass Sie alle hier sind. Lieber Herr Ivan Krastev, ich freue mich ganz besonders, dass Sie sich heute Zeit nehmen, um mit uns heute Abend über Europa nachzudenken. Unter dem Titel „Worauf können wir hoffen? Was haben wir alles zu befürchten?“ Wir sind heute in dieser wunderschönen Location über den Dächern von Wien. Und als ich die Adresse Franz-Josefs-Kai 47 gelesen habe, ist mir ein Satz eingefallen, der dem sprichwörtlich alten Kaiser zugeschrieben wird. Er hat nämlich gesagt, mir bleibt auch nichts erspart. Und zwar mit einem Blick auf eine verändernde Welt um sich herum. Er wäre heute übrigens, nur so als Side Note, 188 Jahre alt, also wirklich alt. Und wie wir heute wissen, es war damals tatsächlich eine Zeit, in der kein Stein auf dem anderen geblieben ist. Aber auch wir leben heute in einer Zeit, die von Veränderungen geprägt ist. Und Veränderungen machen Menschen Angst. Sie, Herr Krastev, sprechen vom ideologischen Gezeitenwechsel. Und Sie werden Ihre Überlegungen dazu in Ihrer Rede heute am Abend mit uns teilen. Ich freue mich jedenfalls, dass uns das, nämlich Ihre Überlegungen, nicht erspart bleibt und empfinde den heutigen Abend als großes Geschenk und dafür möchte ich Ihnen danken. Und weil ich mich wirklich darauf freue, zu hören, was Ihre Ausführungen so zu bieten haben, werde ich mich in meiner Rede, in meiner Keynote-Speech kurz halten und nur ein paar Schlaglichter erwähnen, die mir besonders wichtig erscheinen. Europa war jahrhundertelang Schauplatz schrecklicher Kriege und bitterer Armut, fürchterlicher Epidemien, des nackten Überlebenskampfes, der Ungerechtigkeit, der Unfreiheit des Aberglaubens, der Verfolgung Andersgläubiger und der Angst. Auch die beiden verheerenden Weltkriege des 20. Jahrhunderts nahmen hier bei uns, auf unserem Kontinent, ihren Ausgang. Ich darf Ihnen ein Zitat vortragen. Aus der Erfahrung eines außergewöhnlichen menschlichen Unheils, das viel zu lange gedauert hat, muss eine Gesellschaft geboren werden, auf die die gesamte Menschheit stolz sein kann. Nach 1945 hat sich Europa zwar mit Rückschlägen, aber tatsächlich enorm weiterentwickelt und ist in vielerlei Hinsicht zu einer Gesellschaft geworden, auf die wir alle gemeinsam stolz sein können. Das Zitat jedoch stammt nicht von einem Europäer oder einer Europäerin, sondern aus der Antrittsrede Nelson Mandelas am 10. Mai 1994 als Präsident Südafrikas. Es stammt von einem Mann, der 27 Jahre seines Lebens in Haft verbracht hat. Aus meiner Sicht ist dieses Zitat nicht nur kraftvoll und richtig, es zeugt auch von einem unbändigen Willen zu vergeben und das Gemeinsame vor das Trennende zu stellen. Und es trifft auch ganz besonders auf Europa zu. Und wenn ich Europa sage, dann meine ich damit auch explizit unser gemeinsames Projekt, die Europäische Union. Doch diese, wie ich sie nenne, politische Kulturleistung der Menschheit ist gefährdet. Unsere Union funktioniert nicht in allen Bereichen, wie sie sollte, und sie hat ihre deklarierten und sehr lauten Feinde, die sie dezidiert zerstören wollen. Wir können auf diese Tatsache nun auf zweierlei Art reagieren. Wir können resignieren, die neuen Nationalisten und Populisten ihr Werk vollenden und die EU zerstören lassen. Wir können uns in unsere beschaulichen kleinen Länder zurückziehen und von der guten alten Zeit träumen. Oder aber wir kämpfen um unser gemeinsames Projekt, um unser Europa, indem wir es weiterentwickeln und verbessern. Ich will weiterhin den zweiten Weg beschreiten und glaube nicht nur, sondern ich bin überzeugt davon, dass wir letztlich auch gewinnen werden. Wir alle wissen, dass ein erfolgreiches Gemeinwesen gute Regeln für das Zusammenleben braucht. Das allein reicht aber nicht. Darüber hinaus brauchen wir zuverlässige Institutionen, welche die Einhaltung dieser Regeln garantieren, zur Verteidigung unserer Freiheit, unserer Demokratie, unserer Menschenrechte und unseres Wohlstandes brauchen wir den Rechtsstaat. Und diesen demokratischen Rechtsstaat müssen wir größer denken. Wir brauchen ihn für Europa und letztlich für die ganze Welt. Aber bleiben wir vorerst auf unserem Kontinent. Ist ein Europa ohne Europäische Union denkbar? Ja, ganz sicher. Ist ein friedliches Europa ohne Europäische Union denkbar? Möglicherweise. Ist ein starkes Europa in der Welt ohne Europäische Union denkbar? Sicher nicht. Wir leben in einer vernetzten und in vielen Bereichen global kooperierenden Welt. Wir können das Rad der Zeit nicht zurückdrehen, indem wir die Vergangenheit romantisch verklären. Ich will das auch nicht. Nach fast allen Parametern, mit denen wir Wohlstand messen, war die Vergangenheit nicht besser, sondern schlechter bis wesentlich schlechter. Ja, Reiche werden reicher, aber vor allem auch in Ländern, die ein anderes Modell präferieren als wir. Und dennoch wurden auch dort Mittelstand und sogar die Ärmsten der Armen wohlhabender. Und ja, die Schere zwischen ein paar Superreichen und dem Mittelstand geht auseinander. Aber mein Augenmerk als Politikerin gilt nicht den wenigen Oligarchen und Silicon Valley-Milliardären, sondern jenen vielen, denen es heute wesentlich besser geht. Jenen, die heute mit größerer Wahrscheinlichkeit vom Krieg verschont bleiben, die gesünder und älter werden, besseren Zugang zur Bildung haben, die eine höhere Chance haben, ihren 5. Geburtstag zu erleben und die auch in der Breite wohlhabender sind. Und dennoch stehen wir vor großen Herausforderungen. Klimawandel, Digitalisierung, der Umgang mit künstlicher Intelligenz, der Gentechnik, Nanotechnologie, Robotics und so weiter. Hier müssen wir enorme Anstrengungen unternehmen und mit Entschlossenheit vorgehen. Und gerade dies sind Bereiche, in denen wir uns nicht in unsere Schrebergärten zurückziehen können. Es hat keinen Sinn, den Kopf in den Sand zu stecken. Wir müssen gemeinsam globale Lösungen anstreben und für all das wünsche ich mir eine starke europäische Stimme im Konzert der großen globalen Player. Ich habe nichts gegen sie, aber ich will nicht, dass ich das alles nur Russland, China oder den USA überlassen müsste. Daher kämpfe ich, wie so viele von uns, für ein geeintes Europa, eine starke Stimme für das Modell des freien, demokratischen Wohlstands- und Rechtsstaats in Europa und in der ganzen Welt. Wie die meisten von euch hier wahrscheinlich mitbekommen haben, werde ich das in den nächsten Wochen als Spitzenkandidatin unserer Schwesterpartei von Alenka Bratušek, SAB, überwiegend in Slowenien tun. Und wenn die slowenischen Wählerinnen und Wähler das wollen, weiterhin in Brüssel und Straßburg. Als überzeugte Liberale, glühende Demokratin und Kärntner Slowenin fand ich das Angebot von Alenka Bratušek und ihrer Partei, eine Europäerin ohne slowenischen Pass als Spitzenkandidatin in die Europawahlen zu schicken, mutig und europäisch, und ich musste ehrlich gesagt nicht lange überlegen. Und damit komme ich auch zum Schluss. Vor 30 Jahren, am 17. Januar 1989, bekannte sich das Zentralkomitee der slowenischen Kommunisten zum politischen Pluralismus und öffnete damit in Slowenien den Weg zu einem Mehrparteiensystem. Am 27. September 1989 verabschiedete das slowenische Parlament eine Verfassungsänderung, die Slowenien eine Abspaltung von Jugoslawien ermöglichte. Zudem wurden die Rechte auf freie und geheime Wahlen sowie auf freie politische Vereinigung festgeschrieben, bei gleichzeitigem Verbleib im Staatenverband. Am 7. Dezember 1989 schlossen sich die neuen nicht-kommunistischen Parteien in Ljubljana zur demokratischen Opposition Sloweniens, Demos, zusammen und erreichten in den ersten Mehrparteienwahlen nach Kriegsende die absolute Mehrheit im Parlament. Die Präsidentschaftswahlen am 22. April 1990 gewann jedoch der Spitzenkandidat der Kommunisten Milan Kučan. Am 25. Juni 1991 löste sich Slowenien aus dem Staatsverband Jugoslawiens und erklärte seine Unabhängigkeit. Das löste eine militärische Intervention der jugoslawischen Volksarmee aus, den sogenannten 10-Tage-Krieg, in welchem mehrfach österreichisches Territorium verletzt wurde und 62 Todesopfer gefordert wurden. Er endete mit dem Rückzug der Volksarmee. Was danach geschah, ist traurige Geschichte. Die als Balkankriege bekannten blutigen Auseinandersetzungen in den anderen Bundesstaaten dauerten nicht 10 Tage, sondern 10 Jahre bis 2001 und kosteten ein Vielfaches an Menschenleben. Seit 2004 ist Slowenien Mitglied der Europäischen Union, seit 2007 als bislang letzter aufgenommener Staat Kroatien. Was ich euch damit sagen will: Das alles ist inzwischen 30 bzw. 20 Jahre her und viele Wunden sind immer noch nicht verheilt. Aber es herrscht jetzt Frieden und eine positive wirtschaftliche und soziale Entwicklung. Dieses wertvolle, filigrane Gut muss sich jedoch weiter verfestigen und irgendwann hoffentlich zur Selbstverständlichkeit werden. Wie die Freundschaft zwischen Deutschland und Frankreich. Dieser Friede ist erst 74 Jahre alt, die Freundschaft vermutlich jünger. Und wie gesagt, Franz Josef wäre heute 188. Ich weiß, dass wir in Europa und auf der Welt friedlich miteinander leben und Wohlstand für alle schaffen können. Wir müssen uns nur jeden Tag dazu entschließen. Lassen wir uns nicht aufhalten. Vielen Dank. Hvala lepa.
Liebe Angelika, herzlichen Dank für die Einbettung auch unserer heutigen Rede an Europa in große globale und historische Zusammenhänge und für deinen steten kämpferischen Einsatz für dieses vereinte, friedliche Europa. Was wir dafür hoffen dürfen und was wir eventuell befürchten müssen, damit wird uns Ivan Krastev nun konfrontieren. Ganz kurz zu deiner Person. Ivan Krastev ist permanentes Mitglied am Institut der Wissenschaften vom Menschen in Wien. Er ist Vorsitzender des Zentrums für liberale Strategien in Sofia, Bulgarien. Er ist renommierter internationaler liberaler Vordenker, Politikexperte und beschäftigt sich seit vielen Jahren mit autoritären, populistischen Strömungen, vor allem auch in osteuropäischen Ländern und mit der Entwicklung der Europäischen Union. Und ein Zitat aus aus einem Buch After Europe ist mir in Erinnerung geblieben. Das heißt, jetzt auf Deutsch übersetzt, die Europäische Union war stets eine Idee auf der Suche nach ihrer Realität. Und ich denke, diese Suche nach der Realität und vor allem auch diese Gestaltung, das tun wir heute auch gemeinsam. Bitte um deine Rede.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I want to excuse myself, but the only thing that I can understand in German is when I'm introduced. But secondly, I'm really also very grateful because it's such a beautiful place that even if you're going to see my speech boring, at least you're going to have a great view. So from this point of view, you know. But I'm also very grateful because being invited by laboratory, by lab, I decided to do something that normally I don't do. I had a speech that I have prepared, and then in the last 10 days, two interesting things happened to me that pushed me to talk about something different. The first was a talk with the probably most prominent now living Bulgarian writer, a fiction writer, Georgi Gospodinov. He was also translated in German. And he was telling me about the novel he's working on. And the plot of the novel is the following. European leaders agreed that they cannot agree on the future. It's so difficult, nobody knows anything about the future. So they decided to agree on something different. We should go back to the past, but we should agree which is the common past we are going to like most of the 20th century. So all the EU member states should agree in which year we are going to be back. The only condition is that everybody is going to live in his own country. So from this point of view, probably 1981 was a great year for the Germans, but Poles are not going to be very happy with this. And nothing before 1918 basically goes because some of these member states were not there. And I found this quite important because the second piece of information that pushed me to change what I'm planning to see was a very massive survey that European Council on Foreign Relations have been done and which is going to be published recently in the 14 of the biggest EU member states about the European elections. So I decided to combine in a certain way these two provocations of mine I have been going through and to try to construct kind of a different talk. And I will start with the fact that in 2004, a very famous American cultural critic born in Europe, George Steiner, delivered a lecture in Amsterdam, which was called The Idea of Europe. And he said there are 5 things that basically distinguish Europe. The first is the cafes and the coffee houses, where newspapers are for free, and when people gossip, discuss, conspire. The second thing that he believes is very important about Europeans is that this is a place where people can walk. It's a pedestrian space. This obviously the fact that he's coming from the United States made a strong impression on him. The first, he said, Europe is a place where streets and squares have names of poets, of statements, of scientists, so people are learning history simply by reading the maps of the cities. The fourth, he said, Europe is a place which basically inherited the tradition of Athens, but also the tradition of Jerusalem, so it's always kind of uneasy. But the fifth, he said, Europe always has the idea of finality, the fear of year 1000, when everything basically can go wrong. And he said, probably Americans always believe that the future is going to be fine for them. Europeans, even when we're doing best, we have the feeling that one day this is going to end up. Why I'm saying this? Because a year ago, Bertelsmann Foundation made a big study all over European Union on nostalgia. And it appeared that 67% of Europeans believe that the world was better yesterday. 77% of Italians. And what is quite important is that the younger people, basically less nostalgic, but if you go of everybody who is older than 35, basically the percentage of people who believe that the world was better yesterday was very high. And as you know, there was this Swiss doctor who in 1688 was the first to diagnose nostalgia, because nostalgia was diagnosed as a disease. And it was diagnosed as a disease which was very particular for the Swiss mercenaries that have been outside of Sweden, and it was basically discussed as a very special sense of sadness which people experience and longing for the place in which they have been born. And he said that one of the symptoms of nostalgia is you're hearing voices and you're seeing ghosts. I'm saying this because in a certain way, if you see to the politics of Europe today, I do believe that many people are hearing voices and many basically people are seeing ghosts. But this is quite important because this study shows that people who are very nostalgic are the ones who are much more ready to vote for the far right. They're much more basically fearing any type of foreigners coming to their countries. And I'm saying this because the major argument with which I want to start and basically to try to develop to you is European Union as a political project was developed for societies that were fearing their past. And this was quite clear because basically it was World War II, there was destruction, there was fascism, there was communism on the East, and basically the major idea was we are going to develop a political union which is not going to allow this to be repeated. The biggest challenge that European Union is facing today is that we need politics and political institutions that are going to deal with a society that fear the future. And this is totally new. And these fears of the future has a very different dimensions. Part of it is demographic. They're going to be, Europe is not as important as it was. There are not going to be as many Europeans as a percent of the population. Also on the level of the economy, in a certain way, the success of European ideas means that probably Europe is not going to be the center of the world when it was, when the emperor was around. So I'm saying this because technology, which was so much empowering all of us, is now becoming also one of the major sources of the fears of the future. When somebody basically particularly is following China and kind of this example of big data authoritarianism, the only good news that comes from there is that at least they're not going to be a police informers anymore because now everybody is informing on himself. Basically, your telephone is telling you what you're doing all the time, so there is no need for others to inform on you. You're doing this for yourself. But if this is the case, how to try to turn European societies to shift from this type of a fear of the future to a much more positive view? For me, to be honest, this is the biggest challenge which European politicians of any political party are facing today. So I'm trying, on the basis of the survey that I saw, to try to understand how we can start dating the future again. Because one of the best things about elections, and Tocqueville noticed it very clearly when he was in the United States, he said, elections are a strange thing. When the elections are coming, everybody is trying to convince the people that the world is going to end. And when basically the elections are over, the politicians are telling that everything is fine now. But what is very important is that the elections are also machines for producing collective dreams. You're trying basically to push people to imagine a different world. I'm saying this because going through the data for these 14 countries, and Austria is one of them, I figured out that 4 of the things that basically you're going to read in the papers about the European elections not very much correspond to the data that I see. So I decided very much to focus on 4 myths about what is going to happen on these elections, which on the base of the data, and I have spent some time going through the data, are not basically confirmed. The first is the idea that European politics is a very polarized space. We tend to view what is happening in Europe very much through the lenses of what is happening in the United States and the United Kingdom. And the United States is a very polarized space, to the extent that polarization between Republicans and Democrats now very much resembles the polarization between Catholics and Protestants at the end of the 19th century. The percentage of the Democrats who are not going to tolerate their daughter or son to marry somebody from the other party at the moment, and the other way around, by the way, this is very symmetrical, is very similar to what was between the Catholics and Protestants at the end of the 19th century. So basically the 2 parties functioned as 2 tribes. United Kingdom, the Brexit also very much make the distinctions between Remainers and Brexiteers so strong that 29% of the Remainers said that they're not going to tolerate son or daughter to marry somebody from the other side. 9% of the Brexiteers, they were much more tolerant on this. I'm saying this because, of course, in UK, what is also different is that while in the United States, basically the polarization is very much expressed through the parties, in a certain way, the polarization of Britain is destroying the parties. Both political parties have been destroyed by this. If you go to Europe, and there are 2 or 3 countries in Europe which very much fit this, and Poland is one of them. But if you go beyond Poland, you're going to be surprised how different the situation is. This is not, because the polarized voter, this tribal voter, which people are normally talking about in the US or UK, is a person who is not going to change his mind, nevertheless, of what his party is going to do. And this was very clear for many people who believe that the Republicans are not going to tolerate this or that, which President Trump is doing. It appeared that this is not the case. Basically, you stay with your tribe, and nevertheless, how unhappy you are, you go and vote the way it is expected. This is totally different in Europe. In fact, it's not that European voters are not ready to change their mind. What we saw in the data is that European voters cannot make their mind. And I'm now going to give you some data which is going to be surprising for you. 70% of all the voters in this 14 biggest European Union country I'm talking about who declared that they have certain political preferences are saying that they're tempted to change them on the election date. So we like to talk about migration. The least protected border in Europe is the border between the mainstream party and the populist parties. And people are moving in all directions. For example, up to 9% of the voters in Greece basically said that they're ready to move and to vote for some of these parties. At the same time, up to 6% of the voters in Germany said that they can cross back to the mainstream from support for AfD. So from this point of view, it appeared that at the moment, for these 14 countries, 97 million votes are undecided. Even when people declare that they have a kind of a certain type of initial preference, they go. So if before the relations between the voters, it's not true for parties like yours, but I do believe traditionally for the big European parties, the relations between them and their voters was slightly like a Catholic marriage, no divorce. Now I had the feeling that voters went into the open marriage type of mood. They can go basically here and there. And this is quite important because I do believe from this point of view, this makes much more interesting to see how the parties are going to campaign. Because just saying that you're going to mobilize your voters does not make sense anymore because you don't know anymore who your voters are. We're talking about a big percentage of people, and we're talking for a confused voter, and I'm going basically to make a much more clear idea for where this confused voter looks like. So if you're going in one sentence to define the mood of an average European voter on the eve of these elections, I do believe that the best description came from a children's book, which I have been reading quite long ago, and it reads like this. Lord Ronald flung himself upon his horse and rode madly off in all directions. It is not even basically that voters are staying in a camp, be it left or right, when they're changing. We see a voter who wants change, and I'm going to talk about this. This is very clear on everybody. People want change, but they can find changes in places that they have never been believing that they can find it before. And I find this very important, the first kind of a counterintuitive story, because looking at the UK and the US, we didn't realize how volatile the European political system is. And it's going to be very much about the talent of the political leaders and, to be honest, to the talent of the political parties to fight for these voters, because this is not kind of a decided elections on this level. The second important myth, which is also not true, and I'm going to call it the progressive myth, is not that our political space is like US, but that European elections are going to be a kind of a repetition of the second round of the French presidential elections in 2017, and this is going to be a referendum on Europe, and basically the pro-Europeans are going to mobilize in the way Macron mobilized. And when you go to the data, this is also not true, for several reasons. First, one of the interesting effects of Brexit is that you do not have an exit parties in Europe anymore. If you're going to look to the program of Marine Le Pen, if you're going to look basically to most of the others, they don't want to exit the European Union. Mr. Salvini does not want to exit the euro. Everybody said that they want to change European Union, but kind of passion for exiting, which was so strong after Brexit and elections of President Trump, is not there anymore. But the much more important story is that when you go to the data, instead of seeing a clear divide between pro-Europeans and nationalists, we're finding something which is slightly more complicated. So we asked the two questions. We said, do you believe that European Union works? And do you believe that the national state and national government works? And on the basis of this, you're going to have four groups. Those who believe that both works, that believe that both does not work. One believes that European Union works, the other that the national government works. And these groups, in terms of numbers, looks like this. The biggest group, let's call them the yellow jackets, 38% of the voters believe that neither the European Union works, nor the national government works. And this is a quite strong group. Just to imagine the European landscape, this group has more than 60% representation in places like France and Italy. This is not the consistent voters that have a clear idea what they want. And from this point of view, the yellow jacket is a good metaphor, because in a certain way, they simply want to be seen. They had the feeling that they're forgotten. They're forgotten by Brussels. They're forgotten by their national capitals. This is a very kind of inconsistent group. If you're going to push them to agree on what they want from the government, they cannot tell them. But their major story is that they're kind of out of the picture. And from this point of view, this is it's a very big group. And some of these people are quite ready to vote. And how they're going to vote, I do believe, is a secret for themselves. They don't know how they're going to vote, because it's very much kind of anger and anxiety. The second biggest group is that those who believe that both works. The European Union work and the national government work. And you're going to find quite a lot of these people in Austria. You're going to have quite a lot of these people in Germany. But the interesting story is that particularly the younger people in this group don't plan to vote at all. I'm calling them the siesta voters. They're so relaxed about the situation that they don't basically see any urge. And from this point of view, this is a kind of a group which normally you can expect to be the group which is going to defend the European Union, but these people look at the election as if this is not their elections. The third biggest group is those who believe that European Union works and the national governments does not work. And here comes the first surprise. This group is particularly strong in Central and Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, Slovakia. Yeah, they believe that European Union works and their national government does not work. And I'm even going to tell you why. And because particularly on the East-West relations, I'll go much more. But this is important. In fact, only 52 million of the people that basically have been polled believe that the national government works and the European Union does not work. So we have this mythology that there is these strong nationalists that believe totally in the nation state and they want basically Europe to go back where it was before European Union. But in a certain way, these people are not there very much. And they're not very much because one of the important effect of Brexit was that people understood that if they're going to be a real crisis and disintegration of the European Union, probably some of the nation states are going to disintegrate too. So if the United Kingdom could be into question as a result of Brexit, imagine for other countries, Spain and others. So from this point of view, this is quite important to understand that in a certain way, the clear division that we have been thinking about, and I do believe particularly President Macron was very much betting on, the picture is slightly more complicated. The third myth is the myth comes very much from the right and the far right, which is also not supported by the data. And this is the myth that the elections are going to be a referendum on migration. Particularly Mr. Orban, but also Mr. Bannon, are very much basically putting money on the fact that this is going to be about migration. And there's several things in the data which shows why this is not going to be the case. First, we see a major decline of the arrival of migrants for the last 1 year. Just to give you the example, the number of the illegal migrants that came to the European Union through Italy and the Balkan Road is the same as the number of the tourists who are landing in Athens in 1 day in August. We're talking around 120,000 people, 22,000 people. Why this is important? Because in the case that there are not going to be a new migration crisis before the elections, and there are not going to be new images of people coming in there, it's not that people don't care about migration, but this is what I'm going to tell you more. People care about migration, but different people care about different things. There is a group very clear here who basically see migration as the major threat, and in almost all of the countries, there are people who are going to vote for the far right. In the case of Austria, it's very much Freedom Party. There are people who are much more concerned about integration, and this is particularly about the integration of the Muslim communities. These people are going to vote for the center-right, because we have been seeing many of these basically are people who are much more open to others. For them, the biggest issue is how you're going basically to integrate people culturally differently, and the problem of the radical Islam for them is a very kind of particular issue. And then comes something that is going to come, I think, as a surprise for you, because it came also as a surprise for me. I was sure about Eastern Europe that this is the case, but what came as a surprise for me was Italy and Spain. So in Central and European countries, with the exception of the Czech Republic, but also in Italy, Greece, and Spain, more people are concerned about emigration, their own people leaving the country, than about migration. And this is a very important issue to the extent it appears that 1 million Italians have left after the financial crisis. So people are really very much concerned about their own living and what should be done about this than about migration. I'm saying this because in Eastern Europe we have been discussing this, and I was happy that basically this hypothesis was confirmed. But this is one of the issues nobody is really seriously discussing during the European elections. Everybody believes that the only thing that is about migration, but look at East European countries. I'm Bulgarian. To be honest, I don't see many migrants dreaming to come to Bulgaria. But at the same time, people are never going to understand the strong hostile reactions to our society during the refugee crisis if they don't understand the trauma of emigration, about which I'm going to talk in a minute. But also the other reason migration is not going to be a major issue is that there is no major political parties in Europe which is advocating open borders. The problem of strengthening the external borders is a certain consensus. There is a very much differences how you're going to do it. It's very much differences how people should behave on this, but in a certain way it's very much there. And also why I'm saying that it's not going to be a referendum on migration is the data shows also something quite interesting. People who declare that migration is their major concern are less likely to vote than people, for example, in Eastern Europe who declare that corruption is their major concern, or people in Austria who declare that the rise of nationalism is their major concern. So even when the migration is there, it does not have the mobilization potential that it had in 2015, in 2016. And this was something that I do believe. And the fourth, and something that I'm going to take slightly more at large, because this is, I do believe, one of the reasons I was invited, is that there was a major myth that what is going to happen on the European elections is that Eastern Europe will go wild, basically voting for all the type of populist parties, and the only hope is that basically West European voters are going to save the Union. And this is not exactly the case. In a certain way, as I told you, paradoxically, In Eastern Europe, you're going to see more support for the European Union, exactly because in some of the Central and East European countries, you have a really existing populism. So the push for change in some of the Central European countries this time is not the push for change against the European Union, it's very much the push of change of their own governments that have been very unfriendly to the EU. And this is very much the case in Poland. And I do believe that Slovak elections have been a great example of this, in which you have basically a new person without political experience. Central and Eastern Europe has never been elected such a liberal president ever. If you look at her views, and if you read the opinion polls, where basically the society stands, particularly on social and cultural issues, including gay marriages and things like this, for which Central and East Europeans are particularly sensitive, you're going to see that people are much more ready to trust the person and kind of a political presence than basically simply to be manipulated. But then basically how, if this is the case, we should try to explain the illiberal shift in Central and Eastern Europe, which was quite present in the last days. And this is going to be kind of one of the last parts of my presentation. Being a East European, of course, for me, this was also a quite personal question. And I'm going to give you three major explanations, and I'm going to be very happy to discuss this after that. The first is, the revolution of 1989 was a very strange revolution, from the point of view that utopia of 1989 was the utopia of normality. East Europeans, coming from a communist system that was talking about the future all the time and basically asking the people to sacrifice very much for the future in which they are not going to live in, became very suspicious to any type of a future talk. So the idea of the future was not ahead in time, but was next to you in space. So Poland wanted to be a normal society. A normal society meant be like Germany. But one of the unexpected results of this kind of utopia of normality was that revolutionaries always want to live in the future. As the result of this, many Poles decided to live in Germany. So one of the results for basically change of support for the Liberal Party is that most of their voters are in Vienna, in Berlin, in Paris, than in their own countries. The best example of this was the fact that the current Romanian president was elected as a liberal and pro-Western candidate, mainly due to the fact that you have an unexpected high turnout of the Romanians living outside of the country. So this is, in my view, quite important, because the thing that I touched on and that basically people have not been discussing was that one of the important things that happened in Central and Eastern Europe next to major transformation of institutions, change of property, and basically moving from one type of society to the other, was a major depopulation. Slovenia is not this case, and Czech Republic is not this case. But let's give you some number in order to basically get what we're talking about. The Baltic republics, and these are very tiny societies, lost almost 1/3 of their population. Romania lost 3.4 million people only after 2007, and 70% of these people were younger than 40. So one of the reasons basically for this kind of a hostile reaction and basically very much kind of a illiberal drive came from the fact that the major exodus of people created three types of problems for East European societies. And by the way, my own society, Bulgaria, we are the fastest demographically shrinking society in the modern history in the absence of war and famine. In basically 1989, there were 9 million Bulgarians, around 9 million Bulgarians. Now they're around 7 million. In 25 years, we're talking about 5.7 million people, if the demographic projection is there. So the combination of an aging population, low fertility rates, and major exodus created a situation that have economic dimension, political dimension, psychological dimension, and let's just sketch them for you. Economically, basically the East European business model is kind of going to the dead end, because it was very much based on low salaries and low taxes. because we should compete, and I do believe it was fair. But the problem is that there is no unemployment in our countries anymore. There is nobody to hire. As a result of it, you have a society which on one side very much fear migration, and on the other side, basically because of the shrinking labor market, cannot attract foreign investors. And these societies are trying to solve the problem differently. Poland is the European society which in the last 3 years get most labor migrants from outside, basically Ukrainians. 1.5 million Ukrainians now are working in Poland. At the same time, Mr. Orban decided not to get people from outside. As a result of it, he came with the thing that is called the slavery law, which basically very much increased the number of time that people should work, and they could be paid 3 years later. So from this point of view, the out-migration basically created this economic problem, which is now going to be faced by everybody. Secondly, politically, this is also a very tricky issue, because the fact that the borders are open means that if you're a young person and you're unhappy with your government, you can vote once against it. You can go to protest 10 times. But if nothing is changing, for you it's easier to change the state than to try to change the government. And as a result of this, the people who are most dissatisfied with the political status quo are leaving. More people has left Hungary for the last 10 years in which Mr. Orban is in power than after 1956 uprising. Not all of them left for political reasons. This is going to be absolutely manipulative. Many people left for economic reasons and others, but we're talking about 600,000 people for a small country. This is extremely, extremely powerful to understand why out-migration, emigration is such a bigger problem. And psychologically, and also, don't forget, it touches on the most sensitive part of the public infrastructure. The sector of the economy which is most hurt by emigration is health system. It's much easier to find a very honest politician than a nurse. And from this point of view, this is a very big issue, because all these aging people, they have the feeling that they're left out. That in a certain way they're betrayed in their last years when they need these nurses, when they need these doctors. I'm saying this because I didn't see, for the moment, any major political family which is going to discuss seriously how this process should be dealt with. Because the ideas that are coming from Eastern Europe itself are not the ones that are most promising. For example, on the opinion poll, more than 50% of the Poles and the Romanians declared that they're going to support if their government decide to make legally difficult for their citizens to go to work for a longer period of time. Listen, 1989 was not to reintroduce basically control of the borders from our side. But on the other side, I do believe that there should be a set of policies that are trying basically to show to Central and East Europeans that for the West, these countries are not simply the donor of labor. Because otherwise, the tensions are going to stay, and these tensions are not going to depend on one government or the other government. Even the pro-European governments are going to face this problem. And I don't know why. It's also very difficult for us to talk it, because when you go on the polls and ask Central and East Europeans what is the best thing that happened to you after 1989, they're going to say open borders. When you're going to ask them what is the thing that worries you most, they're going to say open borders. And politically, the most difficult is to deal with something which is the best and the worst at the same time. And then, basically, I'm going to the second, in my view, very important element. And listen, I don't want to make Central and Eastern Europe to look more unified than it is. Because when you go to the data, you're going to see that Central and Eastern Europe, if we're not talking about common position on the refugee crisis, does not exist. Poland is one of the most religious society in European Union. Czech Republic is the most secular in European Union, with 70% declaring themselves agnostics. Economically, they're very different. On this, I have a favorite joke, which I should say, because for me this is methodologically important. And this is the joke of 3 boys, 8, 9-year-old, a German boy, a French boy, and a Swiss boy, discussing where the babies come from. And the German boy said they're coming from the sky, and the parents find the babies in front of the door. And the French boy started laughing and said, this is ridiculous. They come from the bedroom. But then the Swiss boy became very nervous. And he said, do not generalize. It's different from canton to canton. And I'm saying this because in a certain way, this is true for Central and Eastern Europe. It's different from canton to canton. Even on the level of exodus, Czech Republic, only 4% of the population has left. Compare this with 20% in Romania, 25% in Bulgaria. So this is not one and the same place. And I do believe that trying to discuss Central and Eastern Europe as kind of a unified body, first, does not help, but secondly, starts to have a kind of a negative political dynamics, because when you're telling the people all the time that they're part of the same package, they start to behave like a part of the same package. But the important thing that happened, and I do believe it's very important to understand this second explanation of mine, how we are going to explain the Kaczynski phenomena, the Orban phenomena, and even these two are not the same, and their governments are not the same, and many things are not the same. So basically, not everything that people dislike is the same thing, all like. But the interesting story is the following. After the end of the Cold War, we were so eager to imitate the West, and seen from the West, basically the transition period was slightly like this famous Bernard Shaw play Pygmalion. I don't know. Do you remember it? By the way, it was staged for the first time in Vienna. So Pygmalion is the story of a flower girl coming from a very low social background, who was taught by a professor in phonetics in 6 months to speak like a high society lady. So she was introduced in a high society. Nobody recognized that she's not from the high society. And when everybody expected that she should marry the professor, Bernard Shaw insisted she will not marry the professor because now she has discovered her independence, and marrying the professor is not what should happen. And this is quite important because some of the problems of Central and East European societies in psychological terms are not very different than the problems of the second generation of migrants. The first generation comes, they basically do everything that they can in order to basically start to work the system. And the second generation, which was born here, which was much more integrated, much more Europeanized in a certain way, but you start to miss your tradition, you have the feeling that you're treated differently, and also the relations between the imitator and the imitated is asymmetrical power relations. If I want to become like you, two things follow. First, that probably I'm not as good as you. Otherwise, why I should do it. But secondly, that you should tell me how well I'm doing this. In Brussels, they're calling this monitoring. So when you're all the time monitored, the feeling that something is wrong, that basically you're treated as inferior is very strong. And I do believe some of the populist leaders betted very strongly on this. If you're listening to speeches of Mr. Orban, of Mr. Kaczynski, they're going to say, we don't want to imitate Germany or France anymore. Mr. Orban said, now you're going to imitate us. And this kind of a resentment towards the position of being imitator is quite strong. And paradoxically, this explains one of the very important things in the data. In Poland, the most Eurosceptic generation is the people between 19 and 24. For them, simply European Union is the project of the previous generation. They try to affirm themselves, to say we're different. And I'm saying this because I do believe that for the European Union to get out and to stop just functioning as a kind of a nostalgia for a period that probably never existed, it's very important to try to see the relations between East and West, not simply as the relations between the imitated and the imitator. We now face a common problem, and honestly speaking, when you look around, you're going to see that there is Eastern Europe in every West European society. This type of things that have been very much perceived as just characteristics for the East European societies, you can find in the voting body of everybody. I'm saying this, and I want basically to end up going back to the novel of my friend. When we had this conversation, I was trying to imagine, is there in fact a year on which we can agree? is there a place in which we can go back? And I have been thinking a lot. I don't know what's going to happen in his novel. I'm sure it's going to be much more interesting than what I want to tell you. But I do believe that there is only one year on which we can agree that it was best for everybody, and this was 1989. And do you know why? Not because it was a great year from the point of view of economic life. In Poland, it was a disaster. In Bulgaria, it was not very good too. But this was the time when people in every single European society were most hopeful about the future. For different reasons, everybody has this very important hope. So I want to end up here and saying, in the moment of this, the biggest question for Europe is what we should maximize. What is the thing that we see as the core of the message? And my view is, let's maximize hope. And being hopeful is different than being optimistic, as Havel always used to say, because the optimists believe that everything is going to end fine. Being hopeful does not mean that you believe that everything is going to end up fine. Being hopeful means that you should do what you are doing, nevertheless how this is going to end up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lieber Ivan Krastev, ich danke dir ganz herzlich für diesen insightful, surprising, somehow paradoxical speech. Ich glaube, wir haben sehr viele überraschende Momente mitgenommen, haben sehr viel zum Reflektieren und auch zum Nachdenken. Und ja, ich fand,
if you're hopeful enough, you're going to get even 4 hours.
So, thank you very much for being with us.
And thank you really very much. For me, it's speaking in front of you is a real privilege, so thank you.
Dankeschön.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Lieber Angelika, wir hätten auch für dich ein Dankeschön. Ich habe das Abwinken, kann ich jetzt leider nicht akzeptieren. Also, herzlichen Dank auch für deinen Keynote und für deine stete Unterstützung bei uns im Lab. Ja. Ich möchte auch ein großes Dankeschön aussprechen meinem Team, das heute wieder so tatkräftig mitgeholfen hat und im Speziellen auch dir, liebe Barbara Aschenbrenner, hier hinten, die diese Veranstaltung wirklich toll organisiert hat. Euch allen ein großes Dankeschön. Ja, wir haben gehört, es liegt an uns. Es gilt zu tun, unsere Hoffnungen und unsere Visionen zu verfolgen. Und das wollen wir auch hier gemeinsam weiterhin tun. Ich darf Sie ganz herzlich einladen, noch bei uns zu bleiben, zu einem kleinen Gedankenaustausch, zu einem kleinen Imbiss oder einem Getränk. Und auch das, was wir jetzt gehört haben, vielleicht noch etwas zu vertiefen und uns miteinander gut auszurichten auf das, was uns bevorsteht. Vielen Dank, dass ihr da wart und einen schönen Abend.